Yo, what is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, got another video for you guys, and today, I'm actually gonna be doing a new mini series called "What If," and this series is actually gonna be similar to Marvel's "What If," but this is actually gonna be a horror edition. I'm gonna be focusing on the different horror what's called franchises, and starting off, I'm gonna be covering the 1989's horror slasher film Shocker. So let's go and dive in. So here we go. All right, so Shocker came out in 1989. It was directed by Wes Craven. The film was actually centering on where football player Jonathan Parker gets targeted by his hometown serial killer Horace Pinker, and midway he ends up actually getting apprehended, but ends up sacrificing himself to what's called to gain electrical powers, and then after that he ends up actually becoming the supernatural slasher, and then what's called towards the end of the movie he ends up getting defeated, and literally that was kind of pretty much it. The movie what's called became kind of more of a what's called critical what's called had better reviews by critics, and also the film didn't really make that much money at the box office, and Wes Craven, who did actually what's called Wes Craven actually wanted the film to launch a franchise, and what I also found out that the film was actually intended to launch a trilogy. So I guess that we were supposed to get what's called two sequels, but literally due to the box office bomb of the film, what that was called that canceled Craven's plans to go and launch a franchise. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, basically this movie is actually all over the place. I can understand why the movie didn't even did so well, but hey, I'm good. I guess that it could be a few reasons. For starters, is actually the story, the characters, etc. But honestly, really, what would happen? But in conclusion, what if actually this film did actually launch a franchise? Really, how could this film could even actually carry on a what's called a few films, and then director really what's called has something to do with a few changes with the movie, and let's go and actually dive in. So here we go. All right, so starting off, basically, we're gonna be discussing what is actually the story. So the story, centers on where Jonathan Parker, who's actually our main protagonist, and then he ends up being chased by Horace Pinker, who's actually the film's villain. And honestly, the story, it's actually kind of a how can I say, really, the story for this movie is actually kind of all over the place because it deals with with supernatural, and then it also has these dream sequences. Literally, it feels like this film tries to go ahead and cop. It looks like this film is actually literally a what's called a spin-off of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Because I'm not gonna lie, literally this film, what I could tell, it seems that this film tried to go ahead and actually what's it called replicate what a Nightmare on Elm Street did. And honestly, since Wes Craven said that he actually wanted to make a villain that will beat off Freddy, and honestly, this what's called the villain, which is Horace Pinker. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, he's actually a pretty cool horror villain, but literally he kind of feels kind of literally silly. He comes off as kind of a what's called a comedic what's called horror villain. And honestly, literally unlike Freddy, basically in his first movie, Freddy was actually dark and was called horrifying, and then in the other sequels, he actually became the comedic what's called horror villain that we actually know. And honestly, with Horace Pinker, literally he is actually what's it called evil in his was called the first half, but in the second half of the movie where he ends up getting the electrical powers, he literally comes off as kind of as a dark as a comedic horror villain. And honestly, and that kind of literally was called mess up the what's called the character of Horace Pinker, because it just made Pinker what's called more horrifying like Freddy did in the first Nightmare on Elm Street movie. And instead they just end up going towards that horror what's called comedy route. And honestly, literally in the 80s, yeah, there are some horror films they actually went towards that route, for example, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, and also alongside with some of the Friday the 13th movies, and also the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And honestly, basically those three franchises actually kind of had took on that horror comedy route. But the Friday the 13th movies were kind of serious, and then the Texas Chainsaw movies were actually, it was called literally the original was kind of serious, but in the other sequels they literally took that dark comedy route, and then the Nightmare films, the original actually was very serious, and then the other sequels went into that dark comedy route. And for Shocker, it literally kind of leaned into more of the serious and also dark comedy route, which literally kind of the way how it is it's whatever. But if what's called literally the only changes that I could actually make for the story is that literally if they could have just maybe focus on kind of what's called the story, what's called about who is Horace Pinker, and also like what's called alongside with what's called the protagonist. And also speaking of the protagonist, we're actually gonna be discussing about the few changes of like the characters. So let's go and dive in. So here we go. Alright, so starting off with the characters we have is Jonathan Parker, who is actually played by Peter Berg. And honestly, I'm not gonna lie, Peter Berg actually his performance as what's called the main lead is actually kind of all right, but literally like since what's it called? Literally, how can I say? He kind of comes off as more of a kind of a what's it called? Like a how can I say like a I would say like a like well he literally comes off as I would say like a curious character, but literally like one time something happens, he literally ends up what's it called getting on the what's called the case already. Like it kind of feels like oh like it's there, and then he ends up getting straight into the objective. Like literally, honestly, like his character needed like a lot of work, and also. Speaking of that, literally, what's called the only change I could actually make, what's called for the character is that if they would have actually done, if they would have swapped the character, like for example, like literally if they would have made Jonathan Parker a girlfriend as the main lead, just like Nancy Thompson in the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and well, they would have focused on her, and then alongside, well, like honestly, like they should have just changed, the main protagonist and make it what's called make Jonathan's girlfriend the main lead, and then also Jonathan the boyfriend. And later on, he ends up getting killed off by Pinker. So yeah, they couldn't move on that, and also alongside, well, with the other characters, like they would have what's it called like well, you're saying to go and change up the story a bit, they could have just like made Jonathan's girlfriend the main lead, and then she would have been this popular what's it called student, and like well like good in this movie, they could have just made her like a cheerleader or something. And then for Jonathan, he could also his role is that he also was called well in the film he was actually our main lead, but he was also a football player, so they could just have him be a football player, and then alongside his friends, well, like Goody was called. They had some characters that are kind of similar of Nancy's friends from the Nightmare on Elm Street. And then what's called alongside speaking of the characters, we also got his Horace Pinker, and for him they could have like changed him up as well, trying to like well. Like literally, they could have just like literally done the route like they did with Freddy and everyone else. Like they could have just what's called make it like could have just introduce him into his what's it called monster form, and then later on, I guess in the sequels we could actually see him, I guess like what's called in his human form, like like for example like in part 6 Freddy's Dead, like literally like in what's called that movie was kind of sort of actually what's called told Freddy's backstory, and then well in that film the protagonist was actually his daughter, and then well they what's called I guess that like literally in the what's called in the what's called in the well going back to Shocker, like literally if they would have made like a couple of sequels, they could have maybe like what's called maybe like in a couple of sequels they could have just explored Pinker's backstory, and then they could have done it that way. But for Pinker, what I could change him is that literally like his like what's called the way how he's introduced. Like literally like in the film he's introduced as kind of a as a cable repairman, and also like literally what's called towards and what's called midway into the movie he actually gains his electrical power. So literally like what's called for the movie, like what's called the movie what should be should stay the same. Well, for the movie like it's still gonna be called Shocker, but to make it kind of like like what's called the character, like they could just have Horace maybe gain electrical powers where he's actually working, or maybe like here's the they could actually maybe what's called for what's called for Horace, like they could just have have the electrical powers, but he also could be I guess this dark entity where like what's called like no one could what's called see him, and like literally like for him like what they could use what's called Horace as kind of a as a visible what's called entity where he ends up actually going into people's homes and like ends up taking them out. Like literally like it's kind of like similar to like Freddy, like where like literally Freddy ends up killing people off in their dreams. And also for Horace, well, he could probably end up posing as kind of a how can I say? Well, literally, for the idea is that like I literally like Horace could just be this regular repairman that he ends up what's called later on ends up transforming, and it goes into his what's called into his electricity form, and then he ends up transforming into this invisible frequency supernatural entity, and then he ends up taking up victims and stuff like that. And literally, like that's what's called the concept that I would introduce that would introduce Pinker. And well, honestly, that kind of seems kind of pretty interesting. I mean, like literally, and I had some other ideas of how to change Pinker Horace's character, but that was kind of the only way. And also, well, moving on from the characters, like literally, like for example, like what's called Lieutenant Don Parker, who was actually Jonathan's adopted father. Well, we can actually make him what's it called, the what's called, make him the father of our female lead, and like Goody he what's called he and I were actually helping out his daughter to go and find, you know, the what's called Horace Pinker, and well, and they only taking off from there. But alongside, literally, like what's called, that's actually the what's called, what I changed about the film, you know, was the story, the characters, and yeah, like literally, like director could actually fit well, but like it, I wonder, what's called, like what's called, if back then, if it would actually would, if the film would have made a few changes, it would actually came out different. So yeah, but anyway, moving on. All right, well, but jumping to conclusion, I guess I learned the reason why that Shocker failed to go ahead and launch a franchise because, you know, due to its story and characters. And well, honestly, like really, if it was called that time, if Wes Craven would actually made a few changes to the supposed to be, and like literally, I guess that this, well, originally this film was supposed to go ahead and introduce a new horror icon, and which was, you know, Horace Pinker, and well, and then, but literally, what's called, and Horace. Well, honestly, like he's actually a pretty cool horror villain. But literally, like in the first half, like well, he was actually what's it called? Well, literally the first half he was kind of a little terrifying. But once when he gained his electrical powers, he kind of came off as kind of a what's called a what's called kind of more like of a what's called of a what's called comedic horror villain. And honestly, like literally, like that's, well, literally, I would say that's not it wasn't bad. Like literally, they should have just done that in the other sequels, just like, you know, they did with Freddy. Because literally, in when Freddy came out, in what's called the original Nightmare, Freddy was actually kind of dark, and then in the other sequels, he literally gained that. What's called, he started, you know, picking out one-liners, and what kind of alongside with Chucky. Well, in the first movie, he was kind of like, you know, dark, and then the other sequels, he started actually becoming a comedic horror villain and spitting out one-liners. And well, honestly, it literally sounds like what's called, literally basically gets that, like what's called, like what's called, for Horace, he literally kind of, you know, started becoming a what's called comedic horror villain in his what's called in what's called in the what's called in the second half of the movie. And honestly, director, well, like that's kind of like, you know, well, kind of made the character kind of literally not that terrifying. But like if they would have just toned down the what's called the comedic tone of the film, and focus on the dark tone of the movie, then yeah, it would have made it better. And also focusing on Horace, well, literally, like I was what's called, literally, like for the character, like literally, like I said, they could have just changed it to make him kind of more of a what's called electrical, invisible, dark after his victims. And also alongside the film, that literally he also has the what's called, after he gains the electrical powers, he also has the ability to go ahead and possess people. Literally, director, I would actually keep that in the movie, but unless if they use that in kind of more of a in the what's called in another way, like for example, like literally if he's actually what's called, like if he ends up getting what's called caught, then he ends up possessing what's called another victim, and then he ends up what's called takes out the other victim, then what's called, after that he ends up jumping out, and he ends up leaving. And yeah, that's how what's called that's how she what's called, that's how it should have been done. What's called in the film, just trying to go ahead and what's called trying to go ahead and what's called put how can I say, just try to go and use Horace's abilities a little what's called less. And then I guess in the other sequels we actually get to see more of Horace's abilities, kind of similar to like Freddy. Like literally, like in what's called throughout the sequels, he kind of actually had different abilities when he's fighting, you know, his victims. So yeah, literally, I guess that in the film they could have just done it that way. So yeah, but anyway, moving on. So jumping to conclusion is that, like, if Shocker would actually made what's called a few changes to its story alongside with its characters, and also the what's called to Horace Pinker thing, yeah, the film would have became a hit. And honestly, for like the way how it was received by critics, I literally could have maybe got maybe kind of a 60 or 70% on Rotten Tomatoes. And then after that, like the audience score maybe could have actually gone maybe, well, what I can tell due to is like this concept that it came out, like everybody would have was called liked it. And then also for the box office, well, it would have made enough money, maybe like around $50 million. And then if the movie was called, the movie became a big hit, then yeah, like literally Wes Craven wasn't concerned to go and actually make a sequel. And then after that, he'll probably end up continuing try to go continue that route, like what he did in the and what was called, and what he did in that was called the original. And then he wanted to carry on to the other sequels. But at the end, like what's called, the film kind of, you know, did poorly at the box office. And then, well, it actually failed to launch a franchise. But literally, like we also did got some what's called, Wes Craven also actually did mention that he did want to go and remake Shocker in the late 2000s. It's literally his other horror films such as the Last House on the Left, The Hills Have Eyes, and Nightmare on Elm Street were getting remakes. Like literally, he was also supposed to go ahead and remake Shocker, and also alongside he was actually going to be working on a TV series to the what's called The People on the Stairs, but sadly he did not get the chance to go and do that, and then like literally he actually sadly passed away in 2015. But alongside literally of Shockers actually what's called but alongside Shockers actually became one of the what's called popular horror films what's called and what's called the horror genre, and also it's actually considered to be a fan favorite amongst fans, and literally like I hope that we will probably end up getting I guess a what's called reboot or remake of this film in the future, but I guess that we gotta wait and see. So yeah, but anyway, moving on. Well, there you have it, guys. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Go ahead and subscribe, turn on the notification, and I'll see you guys later. I guess that